Strong Pokemon, weak Pokemon, that's everyone's selfish vision. But what happens when you go all the way from strong to weak? Well, believe it or not, that has happened more than we may think. Many Pokemon used to shine and dominate the competitive play, but nowadays they are not even a shadow of their former selves. Nerfed Pokemon, which Karen didn't predict and about which we'll talk today. Looking for the one that took the hardest hit in each generation or generational change, only getting worse in the process. Today, please allow me to skip the usual 1st to 9th gen order, as I usually do in these generational videos. Let's start in no particular order, because one of the most interesting cases that I want to share with you today was actually in Sword and Shield. With its emphasis on the importance of battles, the engine that drives life itself, one would think that Pokemon in Galar would be the elite, more powerful than their counterparts in other regions. But what if I told you that it's not just one particularly noteworthy instance of a nerfed Pokemon? We are talking about the creature that most represent this generation. Aegislash! It's not just that it didn't receive an alternate form, not even a Gigantamax in honor of being the poster child of the edition's name, but that in the 8th gen it became the very first Pokemon on record to receive a direct reduction in its base stats of no less than 10 points in both attacks and defenses. A Pokemon that for generations stood beside the lines of kings, degraded and shamed when its time came. But not even the biggest disgrace can prevent a true hero from shining in the moment of truth. Even if it cannot match the power of the gods like before, it still has something to fight for. And as long as that remains true, it will be someone to be feared. But now, let's take a time machine and go back to a period when everything was simpler. The period from 4th to 5th generation in which many things also changed. Mostly for the better though. Hidden abilities, new items, and mechanics would move the game board, but few Pokemon would really be negatively impacted. Except for one cast that, even being firmly settled until then, would vanish overnight. You see, in the old days, there was a figure in competitive Pokemon known as Lead. A lead Pokemon was used to start the battle in a competitive team, establishing the strategy and trying to set up an early advantage that the rest of its teammates could use. There was Aerodactyl, extremely fast in setting up Stealth Rock from the beginning of the battle and landing a devastating Sky Attack with a Power Herb before fainting. Azelf, doing the same but being able to explode once its task was done. And my favorite Ambipom with its awesome expert fake out that guaranteed to start doing good damage, to then switch with U-turn to the most appropriate teammate depending on the situation. These and many other Pokemon thrived as team captains because starting on the right foot could make the difference between things going well or, on the contrary, having to go against the tide for the entire battle. That's why this role was of utmost importance. In the 5th generation, however, a particular new feature would change things forever: the team preview, which put an end to that class in a flash because, by being able to see the opponent's team before starting, having a fixed and predictable lead put you at a disadvantage from the very beginning, giving the opponent the chance of starting with something capable of neutralizing it, or with something that would make it less of a threat. That's how this class, which became strong under the previous system, would gradually lose its privileges. Some would manage to adapt quite well to this new ecosystem, while others would see their use dramatically reduced, but all of them would be living proof that time passes for everyone, even Pokemon. And for proof, let's jump even further beyond its gates again. The first generational leap from Gen 1 to 2 brought a lot of changes, and it seems that all of them were directed at poor Tauros. Believe it or not, leaving aside Mewtwo and the rest of Psychic types, this was considered by many the best Pokemon in the whole game. Its devilish speed and use of critical hits, a huge variety of movements including specials that it was able to use competently, since special hadn't been split into attack and defense yet and its stat was quite decent. Its devastating Hyper Beam and Body Slam, almost lack of weaknesses, and its endless number of advantages that justified its difficult catch rate made Tauros a species very close to perfection that molded the primitive competitive of its time. But then came the 2nd gen, which did a great job in creating a Pokemon world much closer to the one we know today, but in fact practically all of its changes took their toll on Tauros. The special split left it unable to attack on that side with dignity, which was catastrophic for Tauros with the introduction of the Steel type, especially Forretress and Skarmory, that it could have melted with its Fire Blast if it had kept at least a decent special attack. Then we have the nerf of Hyper Beam, the change of how critical hits worked with speed, a chain of disasters that led to Tauros' downfall, far from the glorious times in which it was second to none. But at least it's together with Miltank in these gloomy times. But the special split was not the only one that turned everything upside down. The physical special split of moves was even more decisive, but for the better. This time, Pokémon doomed to be special attackers of inherently physical types and vice versa received this as a blessing. And learning from the mistakes of the last split, practically all benefited, and rare were the cases of Pokémon that got worse. But of course, there are exceptions, such as Vanette. It's quite interesting to what extent the generational leap was catastrophic for it. As one of the few Ghost-type physical attackers, it lost a lot of power going from Shadow Ball to the faint Shadow Claw. But that's not all. Its main appeal, being a ghost capable of blocking rapid spin, also vanished in the face of the grim Dusknoir, who fulfilled the same role 1,000 times better, the powerful and wicked Mismagius, who could wreak havoc with its speed, and of course, the spectacular Rotom, who to its misfortune maintained the ghost type in all its forms in this generation. This chain of bad luck did so much damage to Vanette that the most viable way to use it turned it into a suicidal user of Trick Room, taking advantage of its slowness to take away the opponent with Destiny Bond. All that grudge accumulated would soon materialize in an even more terrible being, but who can blame it? The 6th gen, simpler times. Let's take a look at something a little more fun. With so much nerfing, this video is getting a bit depressing. The Smogon tier system, which divides Pokemon according to their strength and viability in the current competitive scene, is fairly accurate, being subject to change by the world's best players on a regular basis. Although there are exceptions of not so powerful Pokemon that manage to take advantage of the current situation and become strong in high tiers and vice versa, Pokemon very strong statistically but with very exploitable weak points, or better competitors of the same type, but the most usual thing is that a very weak Pokemon doesn't have many chances in a high tier. But there was a time when a clever brat would manage to sneak into any category and cause real chaos. Riolu. No, it's not all thanks to Aura and its powers. That would be epic, but it happened because Riolu was the only Pokemon with certain traits that made it fearsome. On the one hand, its hidden ability, Prankster, gives priority to all movements that do not cause direct damage. On the other, it learns Roar and Copycat. If a teammate set Stealth Rock, Spikes, and all the garbage before, it could easily join in, use Roar, survive whatever they did to it with a Focus Sash or an Eviolite depending on the variant, and start using Copycat, which is benefited from Prankster, replicating the next turn a Roar with increased priority that would change the opponent's Pokemon over and over again, with the consequent spike damage greatly weakening the opponent's team, no matter how powerful it is, without them being able to do anything until it runs out of PPs or it dies in the cruelest possible way. Actually, there are things that the opponent can do about this, or there should be if they has a solid team. But if it caught someone off guard, it could become the definition of desperation and evil. Anyway, the 6th gen settled the matter, making Copycat fail with moves like Roar, Whirlwind, or Dragon Tail, sending Riolu back with the rest of Babymons, where it's quite strong. Still, after being able to put monstrous teams in trouble, we can consider it one of the biggest and most curious nerfs in history. In the end, it was all just a bad prank. Maybe that's where the name of the ability comes from? What was not a prank were the nerfs of the next 7th gen. Perhaps the most severe in the whole video. Talonflame, the apex predator of the skies of Kalos, ruled unparalleled thanks to its crazy ability Gale Wings, increasing the priority of flying-type moves. It could use Brave Bird, Roost, or even Tailwind before the opponent had a chance to defend itself. Something too good to be true, let alone if it managed to use Swords Dance for some reason. At late game, it could easily destroy complete teams. But the 7th gen downgraded the ability, making it only work when Talonflame has all its HP. This small change destroyed the flaming bird, reducing it from the biggest threat in the sky to just another regional bird, barely above average. Painful but logical considering what such an ability could do, but the other change in the 7th gen is far more inexplicable, disgraceful, and aberrant. The Child of Darkness Darkrai. This time it didn't lose any stats, not even its ability, but a simple change in its signature move. Dark Void, which went from 80% accuracy to 50, made it the worst of the already unreliable moves that can inflict sleep. It was especially nasty, as Darkrai's greatest trick was to put the opponent to sleep and torment it with its ability Bad Dreams. The tragedy was such that since then people started to use this Pokemon with hypnosis, because even that was better. The worst part? The change wasn't actually about Darkrai. Dark Void was nerfed due to Smeargles abusing a move that didn't belong to them in the VGC, where the move put both opponents to sleep with great precision. Something really dirty, but it had nothing to do with Darkrai, who was banned from that category and had to pay for the sins of these fools. Despite everything, Darkrai managed to continue challenging Olympus, tormenting the gods, but all of this, more than a shame, must have been a nightmare for it until it woke up. Coming back to reality also brings bitter pills, and the successful Greninja has been in a dream that sooner or later has to come to an end. As if Ash's farewell to the anime was foreshadowing its terrible fate, in Scarlet and Violet it would no longer be able to transform into the infamous Ash Greninja, passing its ability Battle Bond to only increase in its attack, special attack, and speed the first time it defeats an opponent, which is decent but dismal compared to the permanent change into a monster with a destructive power similar to the top tier legendaries. A blow of modesty that is not the first time this Pokemon receives, because Greninja was already a terrible threat during X and Y before this transformation existed. Going back to that couldn't be so bad, could it? Well, it turns out that its other ability, Protean, met an even worse fate. The power to change its type to be the same as the move it uses is now applied only with the first attack Greninja makes upon entering the battlefield, something catastrophic that makes it hit nowhere near as hard as it used to. No, I haven't left the 3rd gen last for nothing. It's certainly the most challenging in the video, as the pillars of the 2nd gen continued to grow stronger in the 3rd, and good Pokemon in general were given new tools with the introduction of abilities. But once again, there was not a Pokemon but a move too good to be true with which the generational leap had no mercy. Rest in the 2nd gen worked even if the Pokemon was already asleep, recovering its full health and not affecting the sleep turn counter. This meant that, when combined with Sleep Talk, some Pokemon became almost invincible, because when used, the Pokemon would either continue attacking or recover completely. This was how Rest completely monopolized the competitive of the 2nd gen, creating at the same time the longest and most interminable battles, chess games of pure mental exhaustion in which what is a dream and what is reality began to blur at times. The 3rd gen, of course, fixed the move, making it fail if the Pokemon is already asleep, so it could be said that if the 2nd was the Daydream generation, the 3rd came to put our feet back on the ground. And voila! Though somewhat out of order, these are the major nerfs of each generation. I'm not used to talking so much about competitive play, so if this video is well received, we can also talk about the most buffed in each generation. Until then, be nice.